Nobody checked cabin 7 for 5 days. There was no reason to. The cable line at the edge of Jigokudani's upper ridge had been shut down since the storm. One of those early season blizzards that arrives before the mountain is ready before anyone is ready. Closing the station in the middle of an afternoon shift and sending the last technician home with his jacket still damp. Cabin 7 had stalled somewhere between the upper and lower terminals, suspended above the valley floor, swaying in a wind that didn't stop for 3 days. Below the valley exhaled snow. Above, the steel cable held. Inside, no one knew. On the 5th morning, Tanaka Hiroshi arrived at the station at his usual hour. Unlocked the equipment room, filled the kettle. He opened the maintenance log to the page he had bookmarked the week before. Cabin 7 was listed under scheduled inspection. Nothing more than that. He had no reason to feel anything in particular as he activated the hall system and watched the cabin begin its slow descent through the fog. He had done this 10,000 times. He would do it again tomorrow. What was waiting inside cabin 7 was not something any procedure had prepared him for, and neither was what happened in the 3 minutes after he opened the door. The storm had come in fast. By early afternoon, the visibility at the upper terminal had dropped below 30 meters, and the decision to suspend operations was made quickly, the way it always is, when the mountain gives no room for deliberation. Passengers were redirected, staff clocked out. The station locked in sequence upper terminal. First, then the midpoint relay, then the lower building, each door closing on a timer. Each system powering down, the way it had been designed to do since the line first opened decades ago. Cabin 7, midway through its return run, was left where the shutdown caught it. The hall cable disengaged. The brakes set. The cabin rocked once in the wind, and then stilled, hanging between the mountain and the valley. 200 meters above, a silence that deepened as the snow began again. No one knows when Yuki entered the cabin. The station's cameras do not cover that section of the loading dock. There were no witnesses. All that can be said with certainty is this. When the last door closed, he was already inside. He was 8 months old. In the hierarchy of a Japanese macaque troop, 8 months is the age of permission, old enough to stray a few meters from his mother, old enough to investigate, not yet old enough to know what constitutes danger. A cable car cabin sitting open and still on a loading platform would have offered something irresistible to an animal built entirely from curiosity. The smell of strangers, the hollow echo of a metal floor, the particular quality of stillness that small animals sometimes mistake for safety. Whatever drew him in, it held him there just long enough for the door to close. The first night, the temperature inside the cabin dropped to minus 12 degrees. The heating system, like everything else on the line, had been shut down with the station. The only warmth available was the warmth Yuki could produce himself, which for an animal weighing less than 2 kilograms was very little. He found the scarf before morning. It had been left on the bench by a passenger, pale blue wool, the kind of thing that falls from a coat pocket without notice, retrieved from a lost and found box and forgotten again. No particular significance attached to it. It was simply there. And it was soft, and Yuki curled himself inside it the way a much younger animal would press against his mother's chest. He began to call. The sound a juvenile macaque makes when frightened is not loud. It is not designed to carry across open distance. It is a sound meant to travel the length of an arm, the width of a body, a sound meant for someone who is already close. In cabin 7, suspended above 200 meters of empty winter air, there was no one close. The calling went on through the first night and into the second day and into the second night. By the third morning, the condensation from the temperature differential had begun to form along the inside of the windows, a thin film of moisture collecting in the lower corners of the glass, where the cold of the outside met the faint residual warmth of the interior. Yuki had found it. The behavior was not learned. It was instinct, the same instinct that drives primates in arid environments to extract water from bark, from leaves, from whatever surface the world offers. He pressed his face to the glass and licked. It was not enough. It was something. By the end of the third day, the calling had stopped. Not because the fear had passed. Not because anything had changed. The calling stopped because the body, when it has been cold and thirsty and alone for 70 hours, begins to make decisions. The mind does not consciously authorize conserving heat, conserving energy, going quiet. The way animals go quiet when there is nothing left to call toward. Yuki curled tighter into the scarf. He did not move more than necessary. He waited, though he did not know he was waiting, in the way that all living things wait when there is nothing else left to do. 3 days below the cabin in the valley, a different kind of searching was underway. The macaque troop at Jigokudani numbers several dozen individuals, and Mori Akemi had been monitoring them long enough to know each face, each posture, each animal's place in the group's daily pattern. The count she conducted every 3 days was not bureaucratic. It was relational, the way a practiced eye moves through a crowd and registers absence before it registers presence. On the 3rd day, she registered absence. One juvenile male, 8 months last, observed near the upper trail 2 days before the storm. She began the search on foot, moving through the areas a young macaque might shelter the rocky outcrops. Above the hot spring, the cedar stands along the eastern slope. The narrow drainage channels where animals sometimes take cover during heavy snowfall. She found nothing. The troop itself offered no information. A Japanese macaque troop does not organize search parties. There is no collective alarm, no coordinated response to the disappearance of a single juvenile. Only the troop's continued movement through its range, its rhythms unchanged, its social hierarchy proceeding as it always had. By the 4th day, Akemi had extended the search perimeter to include the lower trail network, the maintenance road along the valley floor, the outskirts of the nearest village. She had not looked up. There was no reason to look up. The cable line had been closed for 4 days. The cabins hanging above the valley were infrastructure, not habitat. No animal would be inside one because no animal could get inside one during normal operation, and the line had been shut down before the storm arrived. The logic was sound. The logic was also wrong. On the Virua's 4th evening, Akemi logged the search as ongoing and drove back down the mountain in the dark. In cabin 7, Yuki pressed himself into the corner of the bench, the pale blue scarf pulled around his body, his eyes open, his breathing shallow. He had not eaten in 4 days. He had not drunk anything except condensation. He had not moved more than a few centimeters in either direction since the calling stopped. He was still alive. He was waiting, though he did not know what he was waiting for. Outside, the snow had finally stopped. The valley was quiet in the way it is only after a storm has taken everything it came for and moved on. Tanaka Hiroshi had been maintaining the Jigokudani cable line for 22 years. He was not a man given to sentiment about his work or to the particular brand of reverence that people who have never done a job tend to project onto those who have done it for a very long time. He knew the line, the way a craftsman knows a tool, its tolerances, its tendencies, the small sounds it made in cold weather versus warm, the precise tension of the haul cable when the load was correctly distributed and when it wasn't. He did not think of this knowledge as remarkable. It was simply what accumulated when you showed up to the same place every morning for 2 decades. That 5th morning, he arrived before the light had fully resolved over the eastern ridge, unlocked the equipment room and filled the kettle in the small side office where the maintenance logs were kept. The log was open to the current week's schedule. Cabin 7 inspection due. He noted the entry, the way he noted all entries, without ceremony, without the sense that this particular line item carried any more weight than the dozen others on the page. He pulled on his work gloves. He activated the haul system. The cabin began its descent through the morning fog, the cable singing in the cold, as it always did on clear days after a freeze. He watched it come down. He was thinking about the tension reading from the relay pulley, which had been slightly off the previous week and would need to be checked before the line reopened. He was not thinking about anything else. The cabin touched the lower terminal platform with its familiar low shudder, the brakes engaging in sequence as they had 10,000 times before. Tanaka walked to the door. He released the latch. He pulled it open. The smell reached him first. Animal musk and something else. Something harder to name, the particular staleness of a small enclosed space that has held a living thing for a very long time. Then he saw Yuki. The animal was in the far corner of the cabin, pressed against the angle where the bench met the wall, The pale blue scarf twisted around him in the way that something is held rather than simply worn. He was looking directly at Tanaka, not cowering, not fleeing, looking. His eyes were open and clear in a way that seemed, given everything his body had been through, almost impossible. 5 days without food. 4 days without real water. Temperatures that should have been fatal. And yet here he was, 8 months old, and 4 kilograms lighter than he should have been, looking at the man who had opened the door with an expression that contained, in whatever way an animal's face can contain, something, a question. Tanaka did not move. This was not a trained response. He had no training for this situation, no procedure, no protocol. It was something simpler, the instinct of a man who had spent 22 years around machinery to understand that certain moments require stillness, that the wrong movement at the wrong time can undo everything. He sat down on the platform edge level with the cabin floor close enough that Yuki could see him clearly, but not so close that the space between them felt threatened. He put his hands on his knees. He waited. The cold was significant. His breath came out in long, slow clouds that drifted sideways in the morning air. The cable hummed behind him with the tension of a system at rest. Yuki watched him. 1 minute passed, then another. The 3rd minute was almost gone when Yuki moved. It was not a quick movement. It had none of the sudden energy of an animal that has decided to flee or fight. It was slow and deliberate and careful in the way that something is careful when it is making a decision. It cannot take back one hand forward, then the other, the scarf trailing behind him across the metal floor until he reached the edge of the bench and stopped. He looked at Tanaka again. Then he climbed down from the bench and crossed the remaining distance between them and climbed onto Tanaka's knee and pressed himself against Tanaka's jacket and did not move. He did not let go of the scarf. Tanaka sat very still. He placed one hand slowly on Yuki's back, the way you might place a hand on something fragile, not to hold it but simply to tell it that you are there. The warmth between them built slowly, as it always does when two living things are very close together and neither of them is moving. After a long moment, Tanaka reached for his radio with his free hand and pressed the call button. He had Akimi's number from the annual inspection visits she made to the station, a working relationship of years conducted across clipboards and seasonal paperwork, and the particular shorthand of two people who both know this stretch of mountain well. He told her what he had found. He told her the animal's condition as accurately as he could observe it: alert, but weak, dehydrated, possibly hypothermic, in need of assessment before any transport was attempted. He told her there was no urgency in the sense of a crisis requiring speed, but that she should come as soon as she was able. Then he put the radio down and returned his hand to Yuki's back. They sat together on the platform edge while the morning light came fully over the ridge, and the fog in the valley began its slow dissolution. The cable line was still. The mountain was quiet. Yuki did not move from Tanaka's knee for the entire duration of the wait. Akimi arrived 40 minutes later with a field kit over one shoulder and the particular focused calm of someone who has handled enough wildlife emergencies to know that urgency and composure are not opposites. She stopped when she reached the lower terminal and saw them. Tanaka sitting on the platform edge in his work jacket, one hand resting on the back of a small animal that was pressed against him with the quality of something that is decided after long deliberation to trust. She did not say anything for a moment. She set down the kit. She approached slowly, letting Yuki register her presence before she was close enough to matter, and when she reached them, she crouched to his level and began the assessment with the quiet efficiency of long-practice temperature, hydration, respiratory rate, the condition of the extremities, the eyes. Yuki allowed this. He stayed where he was. But his body shifted incrementally toward Tanaka. Each time Akemi's hands moved to a new location, a small repositioning. Barely perceptible, the kind of movement that isn't conscious but is entirely legible. Akemi noted it without comment. The findings were what the circumstances predicted. Moderate dehydration, mild hypothermia, already resolving in the warming air. No structural injuries, no signs of infection. 5 days had passed. He had come through them. The transport presented the first real difficulty. The standard field carrier, a hard-sided container sized for animals of Yuki's weight class, was retrieved from the kit and opened on the platform floor. Yuki saw it. His entire body changed. The stillness he had held through Akemi's examination collapsed into something ancient and involuntary. A freezing, a pressing back. A pulling of the scarf to his chest with both hands, the breathing changing register entirely. Akemi closed the carrier without comment. She had seen this before, or something close to it, the way an animal that has survived confinement responds to the prospect of confinement again, even confinement meant to help. The body does not distinguish. The body only knows what it has already survived and what resembles it. She looked at Tanaka. Tanaka looked at the carrier. Then he looked at Yuki. The decision was not discussed. It was not strictly speaking within the protocols that governed either of their professional roles. He got into the vehicle with Yuki held against his chest, one hand over the animal's back. The pale blue scarf still tangled between them, and they drove down the mountain road in the pale morning light, while Akemi drove ahead and the valley opened gradually below. The ride took 20 minutes. Yuki did not move. The warmth of the vehicle's interior built around them, and Tanaka felt the animal's breathing against his jacket slow and then slower. The deepening rhythm of exhaustion finally releasing into something that was not sleep exactly, but was close to it, the body's first real rest in 5 days. He did not move his hand from Yuki's back for the entire drive. In the days that followed, the recovery proceeded as genuine recovery always does, not in a straight line, not according to any schedule, but in the irregular rhythm of a living thing finding its way back to itself. The wildlife station sat at the lower edge of the Jigokudani Valley, a low building of concrete and cedar planking that smelled inside of antiseptic and damp wood, and the particular staleness of a structure heated unevenly through a long winter. It was not a bad place. It was simply a place with walls and ceilings and doors that opened and closed on hinges, and Yuki could not be inside it. The first week was defined by what Yuki could not tolerate: enclosed spaces of any kind. The examination room at the wildlife station produced the same response as the carrier had: immediate total, the retreat into the corner, and the scarf, and the altered breathing. Rooms with closing doors, vehicles once Tanaka was no longer in them. The spaces that should have felt safe were the spaces that produced the same response as the carrier on the platform: immediate total, the retreat into the corner, and the scarf, and the altered breathing. Akemi adapted. The formal rehabilitation protocols were set aside in favor of something simpler. Yuki, against her back, secured in a carry cloth she had used for injured animals before moving through the cedar forest above the station in the hour before the light went amber, following no particular route, maintaining no particular pace. It was not therapy. It was movement and warmth and the smell of living trees and the absence of walls. It was the closest approximation of the world Yuki had been born into that Akemi could offer him in the circumstances available. It worked in the way that the right thing often works: quietly and without announcement. The cedar stand behind the station became, in the course of those first evenings, the only place where Yuki's body returned to something resembling its natural register. The breathing evening out, the grip on the carry cloth, loosening the eyes, moving across the middle distance, with something that was not quite alertness and not quite rest, but existed usefully between them. Akemi had worked with enough recovering animals to know what she was looking for. Not stillness, which any frightened animal could produce, but the first small returns of attention to the world outside itself. By the end of the first week, she had seen, on 2 evenings, Yuki's head turned toward a sound in the trees: a bird, a branch settling under the weight of residual snow, and hold there for a moment before returning to neutral. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. At the end of the first week, Tanaka came. He had not arranged to come. He had simply, on the drive home from the station, turned at the junction toward the wildlife facility. Instead of continuing down the valley, the way you sometimes make a decision before you have consciously made it, He found Akemi in the cedar stand behind the main building, Yuki against her back, both of them moving through a patch of late afternoon light. Yuki registered him at 20 meters. The response was immediate and unmistakable, not alarm, but recognition. The body orienting towards something it had cataloged as safe in circumstances that had made safety very difficult to locate. The smell of machine oil and morning coffee, and the particular warmth of a jacket worn through a cold shift. Yuki was off Akemi's back and on Tanaka's shoulder in less time than it takes to describe. Tanaka stood very still, his arms slightly raised in the involuntary posture of a person who has had something land on them unexpectedly. He looked at Akemi. Akemi looked at him. She made a very small gesture with one hand, the kind of gesture that means simply, "You don't have to do anything." He lowered his arms. He stood in the cedar stand in his work clothes, while Yuki settled against the side of his neck, and the light moved through the trees, and the cold came down from the ridge the way it always did in the late afternoon. He stayed for an hour. He came back the following week and the week after that. He did not explain the visits, and Akemi did not ask him to. In the same way that neither of them put into a report the particulars of the transport down the mountain. Some things are simply part of the record that doesn't get written, the record of what people actually do when the situation is in front of them, and the protocols don't quite cover it. The second week, the three of them walked together. Akemi with Yuki on her back. Tanaka beside her, moving through the cedar stand in the hour before the light changed the conversation between the two humans. Occasional and practical. The status of the cable lines reopening the troops' activity along the eastern slope. The small logistical details of two people who have adjacent professional responsibilities and have now found themselves sharing something harder to categorize. Halfway through the walk, Yuki reached. Not to leave Akemi, he made no attempt to transfer his weight, no movement that suggested he wanted to be elsewhere. He simply extended one arm toward Tanaka and held it there. Tanaka reached back and let Yuki's hand close around his finger. They walked like that for the rest of the hour, Yuki on Akemi's back with one arm extended, his hand around Tanaka's finger, the three of them moving through the trees in a configuration that had no name and needed none. In the third week, Tanaka brought the scarf. Akemi had washed it in the first days and kept it folded in the supply room. Pale blue wool, nothing remarkable, the property of no one in particular. She had not known quite why she kept it. When Tanaka arrived that week, she retrieved it without being asked, the way you retrieve something that has been waiting for its moment. He held it out. Yuki took it. He pressed his face into the wool for a long moment. The smell of 5 days of cold glass and the particular chemistry of survival gone now. Washed out, replaced by something neutral and clean. He sat with it for a while. Then he set it down on the ground beside him carefully, with both hands, the way you set something down when you're finished with it. He had not done this before. He had not let go of the scarf since the morning Tanaka found him. The two of them stood in the cedar stand and looked at the scarf on the ground between them, and neither said anything for a while. The light in the trees had gone the particular color. It goes in the late afternoon of a clear winter day. Not golden exactly, more the color of something that has been warm for a long time and is only now beginning to cool. Yuki sat beside the scarf for a moment longer. Then he turned away from it and moved toward the nearest tree and placed both hands on the bark and looked up. He did not climb. He was not ready to climb. But he stood there with his hands on the bark and looked up into the branches the way an animal looks at something it intends eventually to return to. Akemi wrote nothing in the official record about what she saw in that moment. Some observations belonged to the observer. When the time came, the lengthening days, the warming of the valley, the troops' steady presence along the eastern slopes. The decision to return Yuki to his range was made on the evidence of readiness rather than the evidence of time. He was not ready in the way a machine is ready fully restored to original specification. He was ready in the way a living thing is ready, carrying everything that had happened to him moving forward anyway. The release was conducted at the edge of the buffer zone above the hot spring in the early morning, before the troop had moved far from its overnight shelter. Akemi was there. Tanaka was not. His shift began at the station at the hour the release was scheduled, and there was no way to arrange otherwise, and he did not ask for one. He was at the lower terminal when Akemi sent the photograph. No caption. Just the image, Yuki at the tree line, one hand on a low branch, looking back over his shoulder in the direction from which he had come. Tanaka looked at the photograph for a moment. Then he put his phone in his jacket pocket and walked back to the maintenance log. Cabin 7 was listed on the schedule. He checked it first before anything else on the page, before the relay pulley, before the haul cable, before the brake calibration records that were due for quarterly review. He had been doing this since the 5th morning. He would probably continue doing it. He did not think about why. There are things that attach themselves to routine without explanation. The way certain mornings attach themselves to memory. Not because anything extraordinary is expected to happen, but because something extraordinary once did in a cabin at the end of a cable line on a mountain in winter, where a small animal looked at a man it had never seen before and made in the long silence of 3 minutes a decision that neither of them could have anticipated. And the man sat still. And that was enough.